Hello and welcome back everybody to our study of Chabad Hasidus. We are continuing today in the book of Tanya. We're starting with chapter 1 and we'll, with God's help, get through the whole chapter. Thank you for joining. Starting straight from the beginning. Likutei Amarim Sefech Shel Beinonim. As we mentioned, the first part of Tanya is called a collection of words, the book of Beinonim. And we're going to speak a little bit about this chapter. And we're going to explain what a Beinoni is later on. So, it starts like as follows. Perek Aleph, chapter 1. Tanya, it was taught in a Braita. Besof Perek Gimel Denida, at the end of the third chapter of the tractate of Nida, it was taught as follows. Mashpim ototi tzadik val tihi rasha. Before the soul comes into the world, they make the soul make an oath, a double oath, two oaths. The first oath is that the soul should be a tzaddik, and we're going to speak a little bit about what that might be soon, and not a rasha, but the simple translation is a righteous man, and not a wicked man. And the second oath is that even if everyone tells you that you are a tzaddik, you are righteous, you should view yourself as a rasha, as a wicked man. You should always view yourself as a wicked man. That's the second oath. So we're going to start off with a question. I'm going to have a few questions. So question number 1 is, seemingly this contradicts a different teaching we learned in Avot, chapter 2, not to be a wicked man in your own eyes. First we said that you should always view yourself as a wicked man. And now we're saying that you should not view yourself as a wicked man. So that's a contradiction. And v'gam, and also, not only is this a contradiction in the wording, but it's actually a contradiction in the essence. Im yihye be'einav kerasha, yira levavo, v'yihye atzev, v'liyucha la'avod Hashem, b'simcha v'tuv levav. V'im lo yira levavo klal mizeh yachol lavo lidekalut chas v'shalom. So there's a twofold issue over here. Number 1, if you view yourself as wicked, which is what the first thing we said was, then your heart will always be grieving that you're wicked. And you'll be sad, and you won't be able to be out of that sadness. You won't be able to serve God properly, with proper joy and a gladness of heart. But on the other hand, if you won't hold yourself accountable at all, and you'll say that I'm righteous, completely righteous, and whatever anyone tells me, I'm always right, then you'll come to stumble, God forbid. So it's a question of essence. How should we view ourselves? Should we view ourselves as wicked? Should we not view ourselves as wicked? And both are seemingly problematic. Just to give you a taste of what we're going to answer later in chapter 13, we're going to give the answer is that the first oath, when we said view yourself like a wicked man. And we're going to see that later on we're going to see that means not to view yourself literally as a wicked man, but to view yourself like a wicked man. What does like a wicked man mean? View yourself as a Beinoni. That's going to be the answer that we're going to eventually give in chapter 13. Stay tuned. Okay, moving further. So now we're going to start to explore this concept of a righteous man, a wicked man. So there's 5 levels we find in the Talmud. Tzadik v'tov lo, tzadik v'ra lo, rasha v'tov lo, rasha v'ra lo, u'beinoni. 2 kinds of righteous, 2 kinds of wicked, and someone in between. Okay? First is a righteous man, and good is his. The second kind is a righteous man, and bad is his. Okay, those are 2 kinds of righteous. What are the 2 kinds of wicked? First kind of wicked is he's wicked and the bad is his. Okay, the second kind is wicked and good is his. Okay, and the last category is the middleman. He's not neither righteous nor wicked. He's right in the middle. So we're going to obviously explain much later. We're giving the groundworks for the book right now. But now we're not going into the meaning of these terms immediately. Upirshu bagmara. Tzadik v'tovlo, tzadik gamuch, tzadik v'chalo, tzadik she'eno gamuch. So the Talmud actually gives an explanation. A righteous man, that good is his, that's a completely righteous. Okay, a righteous man and bad is his, that's an incomplete righteous man. And again, we're going to explain later. And then in Raya Mehemna, and the Zohar explains, that what is a righteous man and bad is his. That means the bad is subdued by the righteous man. And we're going to see again later on all these explanations in the later chapters, chapter 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Stay tuned. ובגמר הסוף פרק ט' ברכות, צדיקים יצר טוב שופטן, חולו, רשעים יצר הרע שופטן, בינונים זה וזה שופטן וכולו. A different definition we find in another place in the Talmud, in the end of the 9th chapter of the tractate of Brachot. It says that a righteous man, their good inclination gives judgment to them. Wicked men, their evil inclination gives judgment to them. And the middleman, the Beinoni, which can be defined as the middleman, both the good inclination and the bad inclination give him judgment. Again, we're going to explain what that means. Chapter 13. Stay tuned. So now, continues that Talmud with Rabbah. Rabbah says as follows. Rabbah was a giant, one of the leaders of the Jewish people. Amar Rabbah, Kigon Anam Beinoni. He said, let me give you guys an example. What's a Beinoni? What's the middleman? The middleman is like me, says Rabbah, who was one of the leaders, one of the greatest of the Jewish people of the time. He said about himself that he is a Beinoni. He is a middleman. Amar le Abaye, lo shavik mar chai lechol berie. So then his student Abaye told him, Master, you make it impossible for any creature to live because you are so great and you consider yourself a middleman. That means that everyone else has to be wicked. And we know that wicked people are not considered alive, as we'll see later on in chapter 18. So how can you say that you're a middleman? You're calling everyone else wicked. So again, we're asking questions about this whole, all these definitions and all these terms. Continuing to ask questions, more questions now. But the having called Zebeh to explain this with a good explanation. If you look in another tractate in the Talmud, Bava Batra, the first chapter, you see Job or Eov. He was complaining to God, saying, how can it be that you created some people to be innately righteous and other people to be innately wicked? Meaning that a person is destined, according to this statement by Eov, a person is destined to be either righteous or he's destined to be wicked. How can that be? If we have a conflicting teaching. Veha tzadik v'rasha lo ka'amar. In another tractate, in Nida, it brings that actually when just to give you what the Talmud says over there, before a person is born, an angel comes and asks God, what's going to be with this person? And is this person going to be rich or poor, strong or weak? And so many different questions about the destiny of the person. But The angel doesn't ask, is he going to be righteous or wicked, which implies that being righteous or wicked is based on a person's free will. As the Talmud itself continues over there, that everything is in the hands of heaven, everything is predetermined, besides for fear of heaven, besides for choosing to be righteous or the opposite. So how can Eov say that people are destined to be righteous or destined to be wicked? And again, we'll see the answers for all these later. Okay, now continuing with the whole analysis, we're going to continue for a little bit longer. So now a middleman, cannot mean, it's impossible that middle should mean a person that has 50-50. 50% merits, 50% good deeds, 50% bad deeds. So we're gonna give a long explanation why you cannot say that as a Beinoni, that is a middleman. Because if you're going to tell me that he's half 50-50, 50 good deeds, 50 bad deeds, how could Rabbah, which we mentioned earlier, call himself a middleman? You know, Rabbah was so great and so righteous that even the angel of death didn't have power over him, because he was all the time continuously learning Torah, connecting himself to the teachings of the Torah, which would imply that he's on such a level that there's no way that he could fall in a form of having 50% sin, God forbid. So that can't be what a Beinoni is. A Beinoni can't be 50-50. Ve'od, another reason why it can't be, when someone sins, at the minute of the sin, while they're sinning, they're called a complete wicked man, a rasha. And when a person does teshuvah, when he repents, when he returns, at that, immediately he becomes a complete tzaddik, a complete righteous man. So it seems to be all the way one way or all the way another way. A person, when he's doing bad, is all the way wicked. When a person's doing good, returns, is all the way righteous. So it's impossible that a Beinoni should be 50-50. You can't split things up 50-50. It's one or the other, either wicked or righteous. And as we see from sources in the Talmud, that someone that even does a light prohibition that was enacted by the sages, not from the Torah, the sages enacted it, and he's doing the small prohibition, is considered a wicked man. And the name of a wicked man goes so far as to extend to someone that had the ability to stop someone else to sin. He himself didn't sin, but he had the ability to stop another person to sin, and he didn't stop them. He's called a wicked man. So for sure, a Beinoni, a middleman, can't have 50% sin, because then he wouldn't be called a Beinoni. He would be called wicked. כמו כל שאפשר לעסוק בתורה ואינו עוסק שעליו, דרשו חז"ל כי דבר השם ביזה, ייקח את וגומר. And for sure, someone that is not sinning, but he actually doesn't even do a positive good deed. He's not doing a positive good deed, like for example, by someone who wastes the time that he has set aside for learning Torah, which is a good deed, which is a mitzvah. At that minute that he wastes learning Torah, the sages say about that, they relate that situation, a person not learning Torah, meaning not actively engaging in something good, that he despised the word of Hashem, the word of God, that soul should be cut off. So for sure, so and that that for sure he's called wicked more than someone, like we said before, that does something that's prohibited rabbinically, because learning Torah is a mitzvah that the Torah has. The Torah says you must learn Torah. And for sure that's worse than someone that does something prohibited by the sages. So for sure that's called a rasha. Someone that doesn't even engage in positive good things is also called wicked. So that means that a Beinoni cannot even have the sin of not learning Torah, of not engaging in doing something good as in learning Torah. That's the level of a Beinoni. And therefore Rabbah himself mistook himself as a Beinoni, because he was always, like we said before, engaged in good things. He was always engaged in learning Torah. And therefore he was able to mistake himself as a Beinoni. Because a Beinoni is someone that learns all day and does good things all day. As we saw before, Rabbah was able to learn all day. He never wasted a minute for doing good things, for studying Torah. So he couldn't have been a wicked man, because a wicked man wouldn't engage. At the minute a person doesn't engage in good things, he's considered wicked. So Rabbah for sure wasn't wicked, but he could have at the very least been a Beinoni. And that was what he considered himself, as we said earlier, because he was always studying all the time. So now we have a side note. Haga Uma shekatuv bazohar chelek gimel daf resh lamed aleph. The Zohar says, so we brought a statement. There's a statement that the Zohar says, someone who has majority good deeds and a minority of sins, that is considered a tzaddik, a righteous man. So seemingly that's in contrary to all the things that we just said earlier. He sheilat Rav Hamnuna Eliyahu. That's the question of Rav Hamnuna to Eliyahu, but that's not the answer. The answer is that's not the case. A tzaddik is not someone that has a majority of good deeds. Instead, it's as the answer that Eliyahu gave Rav Hamnuna was that's not so. It's not. A tzaddik is not, a righteous man is not one who has majority good deeds. A righteous man, as I said before, one who the evil inclination is controlled by him, is subjugated to him. B'shivim panim the Torah, and then indeed, even though Rav Hamnuna asked the question, because it's part of the Torah, it remains a valid question. And therefore, there is room to say that a righteous man is a person who has a majority good deeds, as we're going to explain now, as follows. Back to the main text. Right? Generally, people say, it's famous, that 50-50 good deeds and bad deeds is a Beinoni, middleman. Majority good deeds, that's a tzaddik, a righteous man. So that for sure has some truth. So what's the truth in that? Hushem hamusha lidin tzchar ve'onesh. That is referring to the actual judgment of a person. When a person is brought to judgment in the heavenly courts, he is judged based on this. Is he a righteous man? If he has a majority of good deeds, he would be considered righteous, which would mean that he would be virtuous in his judgment, and etc. If he doesn't have a majority of good deeds, if a majority of bad deeds, he would be not virtuous in the judgment. So that is all for judgment, for the sake of being judged legally, so to speak, in the court. These are the definitions given to someone righteous and someone wicked. So that is for the judgment, but not the person themselves. who they are on the inside, for that we use a different language. For that, righteous man, a wicked man, a Benoni, have different descriptions for who they are on the inside. And therefore, there's these names as they are in regards to judgment, and then there's these exact same names that we use in regards to the essence of who the person is. As there are many different levels of righteous man, Beinonim, as the sages say, Tzadikim etzichtov shoftan, a tzaddik, like we said earlier, his evil inclination gives him judgment. Shenemach, as the verse says, V'li bichalal bekirbi. What's a righteous man? A righteous man is one, as it says in the verse, whose heart is void within him. She'ein lo yetzer hara, which means he does not have an inclination at all. There is no evil inside of him. A righteous man has no evil on the inside. And that is who he is. Why doesn't he have an evil inclination? Because, as we're going to explain later on in the third part of Tanya, that he actually eradicated his evil inclination through fasting, as we'll see in the third part of Tanya. אבל כל מי שלא הגיע למדרגה זו, אף שזכויותיו מרובים על עוונותיו, אינו במעלת ומדרגת צדיק כלל, but someone who hasn't reached this level, that they've eradicated their evil inclination, is not called a righteous man. Even if they have a majority of good deeds, nevertheless, in regard to the description of a righteous man, the way it refers to the person in essence, they are not considered righteous unless they've come to a level where they've eradicated their evil inclination. ולכן אמרו חז"ל במדרש הקדוש ברוך הוא בצדיקים שמועט עם עמד ושתלן בכל דור וכו'. And therefore the sages say God looked and saw that there's a few amount of righteous men. Righteous men are so few. So he arose and he spread them around the generations. They're so few that he spread them throughout the generations. Because you can't have all the righteous men in one generation and not leave any righteous men for any other generations, because then those other generations won't be able to be sustained. As we know, the world is sustained by the righteous. The righteous is the foundation of the world. The world cannot exist without these righteous men. So now we've come to a point now where we've covered the entire beginning part of Tanya. We've went through all the questions, all the groundwork, all the background for the next many chapters of the book. And from now on, we're going to start explaining all of these different concepts, all these different things. Everything up until now was the questions, and from now on will be the explanation. To explain this idea. Al pi ma shekotev Harav Chaim Vital Zal b'shach hanevuah Be'etz Chaim Shachnun Perek Bet. Harav Chaim Vital, he was a student of the Arizal, the famous Arizal. He was a Kabbalist, and he writes as follows: Delechol ish Yisrael echad tzadik v'echad rasha yishtei neshamot u'kedichtiv neshamot ani asiti. Every Jew, whether they are righteous or whether they are wicked, have two souls, two neshamot. As it says in the verse, I made neshamot. I made souls in plural, which implies that there are two. There are two souls. Shehen shtei nefashot, which are two forms of life. What's the difference between neshama and nefesh? As we said, that these two souls, these two neshamot, are the two nefashot, or two life forces of the person. That the first aspect is the soul the way it is above. When God is just making it initially, on a higher level, the way it is, disconnected from the body. And over there also there are two souls. And then it comes down, actually, practically, in a limited form, inside of the physical body. And that is those two souls that we call nefashot, that actually come into the body. These are two souls that are in the body. And we're going to explain now what these two souls are. And now we're going to give a whole explanation, and that's going to span up till the next many chapters of these two souls within every Jew. Echad, the first soul, mitzad haklipa v'sitcha achucha. The first soul comes from klipa and sitra achra. First of all, why do we call it the first soul? Because, as we know, this soul, which is actually we're going to see later is called the animal soul, it comes first when a person is born. A person is naturally born with an animal soul. And the second soul, which we'll see later, is called the godly soul, doesn't come in when a person is first born. It doesn't come into the body. It only comes into the body once they become a mature adult in Judaism, which is 13 for a boy, 12 for a girl. Only then does the godly soul actually come into the limitations of the body. But before that point, the animal soul is the only one there. And the animal soul is there from birth and onward. The godly soul comes in second. So the animal soul comes from klipa and sitra achra. Literally what that means, klipa is a peel, and sitra achra is the other side. And these are two different definitions talking about the same thing, but each giving a specific meaning. So sitra achra means the other side. And that is basically because the entire world is split into two sides. One side is the side of holiness, which is anything that is related to godliness, anything that is subjugated to God and takes God on as the master of the universe. That's the first side. The second side of the universe, of the world, is called the sitra achra, the other side. And that is anything that does not have an awareness of God, that does not subjugate or accept God as the master of the world. So this animal soul comes from the other side. The other side, which is the side that doesn't accept God, doesn't view God as the master of the universe. And klipa, that's the first definition, sitra achra, the first description. The second description is klipa, is a peel. What is a peel? A peel is something that covers a fruit or a vegetable. And the fruit inside is the good. That's what you want to get to. In order to get to the good, you have to break the peel open in order to access the fruit. So the same thing is with this other side. It's called a peel because it covers over godliness. It covers over holiness, the side of God. And in order to access that side, you actually have to break it. And as we're going to see in a few different places, in one of the places, the chapter 7 of the third part of Tanya, that in order to access the godly soul, we actually have to break the animal soul open, so to speak. We'll see what that means there, in order to access the godly soul. So this, again, like we said, animal soul comes from klipa, which means a peel, it's something you have to break open, and sitra achra, which is the other side. V'hi hamitlabeshet bedam ha'adam l'hachiot haguf. Where does this animal soul lie in the body? It actually comes into the blood. The blood which, as it says straight in the verse, where does this soul lie? This animal soul, the animal soul lies in the blood. Now from this animal soul come all kinds of things. Ba'ot kol hamidot ra'ot. First of all come all bad attributes, bad inclinations. All of these bad inclinations come from the animal soul. Me'arba yisodot chaim, from the four elements that are bad. because there's 4 elements. Everything in the world is made up of 4 elements. We're not talking about the elements that chemistry divides up, because those are not dividable into different things. We're talking about the 4 elements that everything in the world has a certain consistency of, which is fire, water, earth, and air. Everything has a certain is consisted of those 4 things. Or some explain it to be in other terms, wet, cold, dry, and hot. Or another explanation, a more modern explanation, would be liquids, solids, gas, and energy. That everything is made up of. Everything is made up of 4 different elements. And we're going to go through each element and which bad attributes come from that element. So first of all, the element of fire is always trying to raise up and be selfish and essentially say that I am something. That's the idea of fire. So from the element of fire in the animal soul come the attributes of anger and arrogance. Anger and arrogance come from the element of fire in the animal soul. Moving forward, the second element, is water. The second element of water is in the animal soul is the source of pleasures, meaning not pleasures that are not meaning something that a person takes pleasure in per se, but a pleasure that a person takes that is an example of water. What's water? Water is the source of life. From water grows things. Water causes things to grow. So having pleasure in things that grow life, that are the source of life. Moving forward, the next element is the element of wind. What is wind? Wind doesn't have any substance. So from there come which evil attributes? The attributes of frivolity, scoffing, glorifying, empty things. They all come from the element of air. And the fourth element is the element of earth. What's earth? Earth is the lowest one of all of them, and the heaviest one of all of them. And from there come the bad attributes of laziness, of depression. Why? Because what's the idea of earth? What's the connection? They bring you down. Laziness is something that brings a person down, not to do things, to be lacking action, and so does depression. Depression brings people down. So now we have the 4 elements of which the animal soul is made up of, from which come the evil attributes of the animal soul. Now, there's actually other attributes that come from this animal soul. So too, good attributes in the nature of every Jew, like, for example, mercy, good acts of kindness, come from it. Now, these are good attributes that come from it, not in the sense that they're godly attributes, but in the sense that we're talking about now an animal soul, which is like an animal, a biological creature. So this animal soul is also a creature, and it's made up from bad and evil attributes, which are self-focused and self-centered, and good attributes, which are other people-focused. Because by the Jewish people, this animal soul, what is distinct about the Jewish people? The Jewish people's animal soul is from the level of klipa, which we said before is a peel that we have to break open, level called noga. Noga is a mixture of good and bad. Vihi misod etzadat tov v'ra, and it comes from the tree of knowledge. The origin of this klipa of Noga, called Noga, is from the tree of knowledge, which is a mixture of good and bad. That there's nothing good that it has that doesn't contain bad, and there's nothing bad that it has that doesn't contain good. So that is the distinct nature of the Jewish animal soul. Masha'enken nefashot umot ha'olam hen mishach klipot tmeot she'en behen tov klal k'mo shekatuv b'Etz Chaim shach b'emtet perek gimel. By contrast, any other kinds of animal souls from any other nations don't have any mixture of good whatsoever, meaning that everything is self-centered. It's all about, how can I get something out of this? For example, how can there be peace in the world which I live in? And anything good that the animal soul of the nations do is, like we said, self-focused. It's all, how can I gain something out of it? Ukediita bagmar al pasuk v'chesed le'umim chatat shekol tzedaka v'chesed she'umat olam osin inan ela lihityayich chulu. End of chapter 1. As it says in the Talmud, the verse says the kindness for the nations is a sin. What is explains on that verse that any kindness, any justice that is done by the nations of the world, they do it for the self-glorification. Again, like we said, in order that I should gain something out of it. Now, this isn't over here a study on the animal souls of the nations of the world. Right now, we're actually doing the opposite. We're trying to study the animal soul of the Jewish people. And in order to understand the animal soul of the Jewish people, we have to contrast it to the animal soul of the other nations. It's a specific type. The Jewish animal soul is one specific type, like we said before, which comes from the level of klipa called Noga. And we're going to explain later on what that is. Thank you so much for joining.